The morning sun filters through rows of apple trees, catching dewdrops like tiny prisms across my orchard. I pause mid-stride, watching this daily miracle with the same reverence my grandfather taught me decades ago. This land represents 3 generations of my family history, countless hours of sweat equity, and a delicate balance with nature that most people never truly understand. Each morning begins the same way, boots crunching along mulched paths as I inspect fruit, note problems, and feel the almost sacred connection to the soil beneath my feet. My fingers brush against the rough bark of a Macintosh tree planted by my father when I was born. Every tree tells a story. Every season brings challenges and rewards that city people rarely comprehend. My orchard does not just provide my livelihood. It is my life purpose, the legacy I maintain and hope to someday pass along. The rhythms of pruning, fertilizing, pest management, and harvest have shaped my sense of time more than any calendar or clock ever could. Last winter, I noticed the first signs of trouble, small brown spots appearing on young leaves, then spreading through an entire section of Liberty apples. I tried everything in my organic toolkit: beneficial insects, neem oil sprays, specialized fungicides approved for organic production. The agricultural extension agent confirmed my fears after examining samples. We faced a particularly aggressive fungal infection that threatened not just this season, but potentially my entire orchard if left unchecked. "You have tried all the organic options," Agent Peterson said, shaking his head. "Sometimes even the most dedicated sustainable farmers face situations where targeted chemical intervention becomes necessary. Consider it medicine for your trees rather than a defeat of your principles." After sleepless nights and careful research, I reluctantly scheduled crop dusting as a last resort, a specialized organic-approved treatment delivered from the air to reach all affected areas efficiently. The paperwork alone took weeks: environmental assessments, safety protocols, and formal notifications to properties within a 1-mile radius. I personally posted notices on every boundary of my property 3 weeks in advance, as required by agricultural regulations. My new neighbor Karen moved into the luxury home overlooking my eastern boundary last year. Initially, she seemed pleasant enough, frequently commenting on how charming my orchard looked from her panoramic windows. She smiled and waved whenever our paths crossed at the local farmers market where I sold my produce. "Your little farm adds such rustic charm to the view from my breakfast nook," she told me once, her diamond tennis bracelet catching sunlight as she gestured toward my 100-acre operation. Something in her tone made me uneasy, but I nodded politely. I notice how her eyes appraise everything with calculation rather than appreciation. When she asks questions about my operation, they focus on property values and aesthetic concerns rather than agricultural practices. Her new landscaping pushes right to the property line, her sprinkler system occasionally spraying onto my access road. Little do I know that her perceived ownership of the view would soon collide with my actual ownership of the land in ways I could never anticipate. The battle lines drawn in soil and pride would test not just my patience, but the very future of my family legacy. The first signs of trouble were subtle but unmistakable. Walking my eastern boundary one morning, I discovered footprints in freshly tilled soil where no worker should have been. Days later, I noticed several premium Honeycrisp apples missing from boundary trees, not eaten by wildlife but cleanly picked by human hands. Most bizarre was finding garden chairs mysteriously appearing at my best viewpoint overlooking the valley. Someone had created an unauthorized sitting area on my property, complete with a small side table holding coffee cup rings. I removed them twice, only to find them reappearing days later, pushed farther into my land. When I finally caught Karen wandering through my trees with 3 friends, phones raised for selfies among blossoming branches, my patience reached its limit. I approached calmly, removing my work gloves. "Good morning. I see you are enjoying the orchard," I said, keeping my voice even. "I should mention this is private agricultural property, not a public garden or park. The pesticides and fertilizers we use make it unsafe for casual visitors." Her response chilled me. Karen lowered her designer sunglasses, her perfectly manicured hand resting on her hip. "Nobody owns beauty," she declared with a practiced smile that never reached her eyes. "These trees have been here long before your family claimed them. Views like this should be shared, not hoarded." Her friends tittered nervously as I stood speechless. Before leaving, she added, "Besides, we are just appreciating the scenery. No harm done." They departed through a section of fence I later discovered had been deliberately lowered to create an easier access point from her property. Meanwhile, the fungal infestation grew worse. Entire sections of trees showed damage, threatening not just this season but potentially spreading deeper into my orchard. The agricultural extension officer visited again, his expression grim as he examined the spreading infection. "You need to act quickly," he warned. "This strain spreads aggressively when conditions are right. The treatment window is closing." After exhausting every organic option including specialized predatory insects and botanical oils, I made the difficult decision to proceed with aerial crop dusting. The procedure required extensive paperwork, environmental assessments, and formal notifications to all properties within a mile radius. I meticulously followed every regulation, posting the required notices at all property boundaries. The same week I posted these legally required notices, I received an official letter from the county planning department. Opening it at my kitchen table, my coffee grew cold as I read through complaints regarding unsightly agricultural equipment, improper worker housing facilities, and unregulated chemical use on my property. The complaint came anonymously, but when I visited the county office to examine the original filing, the handwriting on the submission form matched Karen's ornate script from the neighborhood welcome card she had given me months earlier. Each accusation was exaggerated or entirely fabricated. My equipment was properly stored, my seasonal worker housing exceeded requirements, and my operation had maintained organic certification for 15 years. Defending myself required days away from critical orchard work, gathering documentation and photographs to refute each false claim. The county inspector apologized after his visit confirmed my compliance. "This happens sometimes with new residents moving near agricultural operations," he admitted quietly. "They buy for the view then try to change what they are viewing. Just keep your paperwork in order. I have a feeling this will not be the last complaint." He was right. The battle for my orchard had only just begun, and my neighbor was proving herself a formidable opponent who viewed my family legacy as nothing more than an inconvenient obstruction to her perfect countryside aesthetic. Karen's encroachments grew from annoying to alarming over the next few weeks. Walking my property line one morning, I discovered her gardener actively extending her landscape design onto my land. The worker was removing my boundary markers in the process, replacing them with ornamental shrubs that created a visually pleasing but completely unauthorized buffer zone. "Excuse me," I called out, approaching the worker who looked up nervously. "Those markers indicate the legal property line. You are working on my land without permission." The gardener apologized profusely, explaining that Mrs. Karen had specifically instructed him to clean up the unsightly edge, and extend the planting beds to create a more natural transition. He showed me her hand-drawn plans, which clearly indicated work several feet beyond her actual property line. When confronted later that day, Karen stood on her expansive back deck, arms crossed defensively. Her expression hardened as I explained the boundary violation. "Those property lines are obviously incorrect," she insisted, gesturing dismissively. "My real estate agent assured me our property extends to the natural tree line. Besides, your dirty farm operations are decreasing my property values. The least you could do is allow me to beautify the edge for both our benefits." I maintained my composure, despite the insult to my meticulously maintained orchard. "The survey markers are legally binding. I have records dating back 50 years confirming the boundaries. Please respect my property rights as I respect yours." Karen's smile turned cold. "My husband is on the town planning board. Perhaps we should discuss having your outdated agricultural zoning reviewed. This area is developing quickly. Progress happens whether we like it or not." Each attempt at reasonable discussion was met with practiced victimhood and thinly veiled threats. Her tone suggested I should be grateful for her attention to my property rather than offended by her trespassing. Days later, concerned neighbors began forwarding me screenshots from our community social media groups. Karen had launched a subtle but effective campaign describing my toxic agricultural practices and dangerous chemicals that supposedly threatened neighborhood children and pets. Her posts never mentioned me by name, but included photos of my orchard with captions like, "Do we really want this kind of operation near our homes? And who monitors what gets sprayed near our backyards?" Most alarming were messages from Jim, my longtime neighbor, showing private HOA board discussions where Karen, newly elected to the board, outlined strategies to address problematic agricultural eyesores through aggressive code enforcement. Though my orchard predated the housing development by generations and enjoyed grandfather protections, she was researching ways to force changes through technicalities and reinterpretation of existing regulations. The situation reached critical mass one Tuesday morning when I noticed delivery trucks with party rental logos turning into Karen's driveway. Curious, I watched from my barn as workers unloaded tents, tables, and party equipment. Throughout the day, they carried supplies not just onto Karen's manicured lawn, but directly into the section of my orchard closest to her property line. Approaching one worker during his smoke break, I casually asked about the event preparations. His innocent response sent ice through my veins. "Big garden party this Saturday," he explained. "The lady wants everything set up under the apple trees. Says she has this whole area reserved for an exclusive luncheon, some kind of fundraiser with local officials attending." Saturday, the exact date scheduled for crop dusting, the date posted on every boundary of my property for the past 3 weeks, the date that represented my last chance to save my orchard from devastating fungal infection. My mind raced as I thanked the worker and walked quickly back to my house. This was no coincidence. This was calculated warfare disguised as a social event. The invasion happened with astonishing efficiency. In less than 2 days, Karen transformed the eastern corner of my orchard into an elaborate entertaining space. White tents bloomed between my trees like oversized mushrooms. String lights wrapped around ancient trunks. Imported furniture created conversation areas directly on my soil, their legs sinking slightly into ground that had been cultivated for generations. When I approached the workers to question their presence on my property, a foreman produced a crude permission document with what appeared to be my signature at the bottom. I stared at the obvious forgery, my hands shaking with restrained anger. "This is not my signature," I stated firmly. "This document is fraudulent. You are setting up on private agricultural property without owner consent." The workers exchanged uncomfortable glances, clearly caught in someone else's deception. Before they could respond, a luxury SUV rolled up the farm access road, tires crunching on gravel not meant for such vehicles. Karen emerged wearing pristine gardening gloves, though her manicured nails had clearly never touched soil. She carried designer pruning shears like an accessory rather than a tool. "Oh good, you have met my setup crew," she called out with artificial brightness. "Everything coming along wonderfully, I see." I confronted her immediately. "Karen, you forged my signature on a fake permission document. These workers are trespassing on private property. This event cannot happen here." She laughed lightly, as if I had told an amusing joke at a cocktail party. "This unused section of your farm will look so much better hosting my spring garden luncheon," she announced, as if doing me a tremendous favor. "I have invited the mayor and zoning commissioner to see what we are trying to accomplish here. Much more civilized than your usual activities, do not you think?" Her words confused me until her husband arrived minutes later, surveying the setup with obvious approval. He spoke carelessly, not realizing I stood within earshot. "Perfect showcase for the proposal," he said, pointing toward my main production area. "Everyone will immediately see how this underutilized agricultural eyesore could be transformed. The commissioners need visual examples to approve rezoning applications." Their true intention hit me like physical blow. This was not merely about hosting a party on my land. This was the opening move in a calculated plan to force me out entirely. Later that evening, after they departed, I discovered printed proposals accidentally left in one of the tents. The glossy pages detailed plans to petition for rezoning of my non-contributing agricultural land for residential development, complete with architectural renderings showing my historic orchard replaced by luxury homes with names like Orchard View Estates and Heritage Apple Lane. One diagram particularly chilled me, a phased development approach beginning with the exact section where Karen had placed her tents. The document referenced establishing precedent for non-agricultural use as a critical first step toward full rezoning. My hands trembled as I flipped through pages showing my family legacy erased for the profit of developers who saw nothing but undervalued real estate where I saw generations of history. My frantic calls to the crop dusting company confirmed my worst fears. Any unauthorized structures or people present during application would constitute a serious safety violation. The pilot would be forced to abort the treatment if tents or people were visible in the target area. "We cannot spray with people present," the manager explained firmly. "Environmental regulations and safety protocols strictly prohibit it. We would need to reschedule." "How long would rescheduling take?" I asked, already dreading the answer. "At least 3 weeks for new permits and notifications, possibly longer." The agricultural extension agent confirmed what this delay would mean. 3 more weeks would put us beyond the effective treatment window. The infection would spread throughout your entire eastern section. You could lose half your productive trees over the next year. That night, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by documents, property deeds, agricultural permits, crop dusting authorizations, and those terrible development plans, feeling the walls closing in around me. My family had worked this land through depression, war, and countless challenges. Yet none had been as insidious as this neighborly invasion disguised as social niceties. For the first time, I genuinely feared losing everything my grandfather had built and my father had entrusted to me. That night, I paced my farmhouse floor until the ancient boards creaked in protest beneath my feet. Every step revealed the impossible choice confronting me. The crop dusting was scheduled for Saturday morning, less than 48 hours away. Karen's party would be in full swing precisely when the treatment needed to occur. Proceeding would spray harmless but unpleasant organic pesticide over her unauthorized party, potentially affecting innocent guests who had no idea they had been invited onto stolen land. Though not dangerous, the spray would leave a noticeable residue and distinct odor that would ruin formal attire and an outdoor luncheon. I could face potential liability despite being within my legal rights. Canceling meant losing not just the substantial non-refundable deposit but potentially my entire harvest, and with it, my ability to maintain the orchard another season. The treatment window was closing rapidly. Without intervention, the fungal infection would spread beyond control, potentially affecting trees that had stood for generations. The financial loss would be devastating. Around midnight, a gentle knock at my door revealed Jim, my neighbor of 30 years, holding a thermos. "Saw your lights on," he said simply. "Figured you could use this." Jim had farmed adjacent land until retiring and selling to developers 5 years earlier. He understood agricultural challenges like few others in our rapidly suburbanizing community. As we sat at my kitchen table, steam rising from coffee mugs, I explained my situation in detail. "She is counting on your decency," Jim explained after listening carefully. "She knows you will cancel rather than risk hurting people. Then she will claim temporary adverse possession based on your approval of her event. These developer types have used this playbook before." He pointed to a specific clause in my county agricultural protection documentation. "Your grandfather helped write these protections for a reason. Once you surrender ground, literally, you never get it back." My calls to local authorities the next morning proved futile. The sheriff's deputy I spoke with shifted uncomfortably when I explained the situation. "Sounds like a civil matter," he explained awkwardly. "We cannot remove people without a court order unless there is immediate danger." His reluctance made sense when he added, "Besides, if the mayor is attending, well, it gets complicated." He was unwilling to contradict someone with the mayor's influence, especially over what could be characterized as a neighborly dispute rather than criminal trespassing. The crop dusting company was sympathetic but firm. Their representative explained, "We understand your situation, but our hands are tied by regulations. Rescheduling would push treatment beyond the effective window and require another round of permits and notifications, potentially taking weeks. By then, the infestation would have spread beyond salvation. 3 generations of careful stewardship balanced on the edge of disaster, because one entitled neighbor believed her social aspirations outweighed my property rights." I sat on my porch that evening watching workers complete the elaborate party setup on my land. String lights twinkled mockingly among trees that might not survive another season without treatment. The beautiful space that had sustained my family for generations was being weaponized against me. Either choice seemed impossible: become the villain who ruined an elaborate social event, or surrender my livelihood and legacy. The solution, when it came, arrived not from anger but from the law itself. As darkness fell, I reviewed every agricultural regulation, property statute, and environmental requirement governing my operation. Somewhere in these documents must lie the path forward that protected both my land and my conscience. I would not be forced to choose between my decency and my survival. Dawn found me at my kitchen table surrounded by agricultural regulations, property laws, and notification requirements. I had slept barely 2 hours, but adrenaline kept me focused as I formulated my strategy. My documentation was meticulous, dated photos of every posted notice, certified mail receipts, county approvals, and environmental clearances. First, I visited the crop dusting company in person, bringing all relevant documentation. The operations manager reviewed everything carefully. "You have exceeded every legal requirement for notification," he confirmed after examining my files. All adjacent property owners were properly notified through multiple channels. Your liability is covered as long as you have properly notified adjacent property owners. I requested written confirmation of this assessment, which he provided on company letterhead. Next, I drove to the county agricultural office, where Agent Peterson reviewed my situation. "The agricultural protection statutes are clear," he assured me. "Scheduled treatments take precedence over unauthorized gatherings on agricultural land. The notifications posted at your property boundaries constitute legal warning." Armed with this confirmation, I returned home to implement the next phase of my plan. I drafted a formal final notice, detailing the exact timing of tomorrow's scheduled treatment, potential effects of the organic pesticide on humans and property, and explicit warning against unauthorized presence on treated land. I hand-delivered this notice to Karen's home, recording the interaction on my phone as she answered the door in tennis attire. Her expression shifted from annoyance to dismissal as I explained the situation. "This is your final official notification that crop dusting will proceed as scheduled tomorrow at 11:00 a.m., I stated clearly. "Any persons or property present on my land during treatment will be exposed to organic pesticide spray. While not dangerous, it will leave residue and odor inappropriate for formal gatherings." Karen laughed, taking the notice and dropping it carelessly on a side table. "Your dramatic warnings are noted," she replied with a smirk. "But you and I both know you will not go through with it while the mayor and commissioner are present. I suggest you reschedule your little farm chores for a more appropriate time." She threatened legal action if I disrupted her event and closed the door before I could respond. Her certainty disturbed me, suggesting connections and influence I might not be able to overcome. Most crucially, I contacted the party rental company directly. Their downtown office welcomed me professionally until I explained the situation. The risk management supervisor grew increasingly concerned as I provided documentation showing their equipment was placed on private property without owner consent and would be subject to scheduled agricultural treatments. "This puts us in a difficult position," he admitted, reviewing my evidence. "Our contract is with Mrs. Henderson, but we cannot knowingly leave equipment in an area scheduled for chemical application." Their risk management team immediately understood the liability implications. "We have insurance requirements that explicitly prohibit placement of rental equipment in areas undergoing agricultural treatment," the manager explained, promising to retrieve everything immediately. I provided them copies of all my documentation, including the scheduled treatment notice and property boundary survey. Within hours, their trucks arrived at my orchard to remove the equipment. Karen intercepted them at the entrance to her illegal party space, her voice carrying across the orchard as she berated the workers. "You cannot remove anything. We have a contract. The event is tomorrow." The company supervisor attempted to explain the liability issues, but Karen threatened legal action against the rental company for breach of contract. Left with no choice, they documented her refusal with photographs and video, then withdrew, unwilling to risk exposure of their property or legal liability, but equally unwilling to forcibly remove equipment against client wishes. That evening, I made one final preparation. I contacted everyone I could identify from the guest list, discreetly warning them about the scheduled agricultural treatment. Several thanked me for the information, though most seemed confused by the conflicting messages. As darkness fell, I reviewed my strategy once more, checking weather forecasts that predicted perfect conditions for both crop dusting and Karen's doomed garden party. Morning arrived with perfect blue skies, ideal conditions for both aerial spraying and outdoor entertaining. I watched from my kitchen window as caterers arrived early, setting up under the white tents that remained stubbornly in place among my apple trees. The irony of their beauty was not lost on me. Elegant white canopies nestled among branches that desperately needed treatment to survive. I made one final attempt at prevention, walking to the property line where Karen directed flower arrangements and table settings. Workers bustled around her, arranging everything to her exacting specifications. "Karen, the crop dusting begins in 3 hours," I warned, loud enough for workers to hear. "Everyone needs to leave by then. The plane is scheduled and will spray this entire section as legally notified for weeks." Karen laughed, her designer sundress catching morning light as she turned to her staff. "This is just the farmer I mentioned," she announced loudly. "Please ignore him. He is simply trying to disrupt our important community event out of spite." She approached me with a lowered voice. "The mayor and commissioner will remember your interference. Your outdated operation is living on borrowed time. Be smart and reschedule your spraying if you want any chance of keeping your precious trees." By mid-morning, guests in formal attire began arriving, parking along my access road and walking through the illegally created path to the party area. I recognized several influential community members, including bank executives, developers, and local officials. The mayor arrived at 11:30, greeted with champagne and effusive welcome from Karen and her husband. From my farmhouse porch, I watched with a sick feeling as the distant drone of the crop duster grew louder. I had placed calls to every guest I could identify, warning them directly about the scheduled treatment. Some had quietly departed after arriving and seeing the warning signs I had prominently posted that morning. Most remained, however, assured by Karen that I was simply trying to ruin her event out of jealousy. The yellow plane appeared over the tree line precisely on schedule, its distinctive shape growing larger as it approached my orchard. I raised binoculars to see the pilot beginning his approach sequence. He had confirmed earlier that morning that all permissions were in order and that he would proceed as planned despite the unauthorized gathering. The reaction was immediate when guests spotted the approaching aircraft. Confusion rippled through the crowd as the plane began its first pass along the infested section. The organic spray, harmless but distinctly unpleasant with its sulfur odor, descended in a fine mist over white tablecloths and formal attire. Chairs overturned as guests fled the treatment area, champagne glasses abandoned on tables now speckled with organic residue. Women in summer dresses and men in light-colored suits found themselves marked with tiny yellowish droplets that would stain fabric and leave a distinctive odor for days. Karen's shrieks carried across the orchard as she stood center stage in her ruined party, waving frantically at the pilot as if she could command him to stop through sheer force of will. "This is illegal," she screamed, pulling out her phone to record the plane making another careful pass over the infected trees. "I will sue you for everything you own." The mayor, his suit jacket spotted with spray, departed quickly without the promised discussion of rezoning proposals. Other guests hurried to their vehicles, some shouting angrily while others simply looked confused by the disaster unfolding around them. By afternoon, the orchard stood empty of trespassers. the abandoned party decorations creating a surreal scene beneath trees that had now received their essential treatment. The aftermath unfolded over subsequent weeks with a justice more complete than I could have orchestrated myself. Karen's reputation collapsed within the community she had so desperately tried to impress. The mayor, furious at being deliberately placed in such a compromising position, distanced himself immediately from the Hendersons and their development proposals. I was not informed the event was on contested property, he stated publicly when questioned about the incident. The city cannot involve itself in private property disputes. Most devastating for Karen, the Homeowners Association called an emergency meeting when members discovered her unauthorized use of community funds for legal opinions about acquiring my land. Her position on the board became untenable, her resignation demanded by the same neighbors she had cultivated as allies. The party rental company sent her a substantial bill for cleaning and restoration of equipment exposed to agricultural spray, a cost her insurance refused to cover due to the willful placement of property in a known treatment area against explicit warning. By winter, Karen rarely appeared in community events. Her social media accounts went quiet after several neighbors publicly challenged her version of events with documentation I had provided showing the extensive notifications and warnings delivered before the fateful day. The following spring, a for sale sign appeared at her property. I watched from my tractor as moving trucks arrived weeks later. Our final encounter came as she supervised movers loading the last of her belongings. "You ruined everything," she said, her voice lacking the confidence that had once defined her. "This was supposed to be our dream home." "No," I replied simply. "You tried to ruin my family legacy for your view. The orchard was here first, and with proper care, it will remain long after both of us are gone." She left without response, her luxury SUV disappearing down the lane as my trees bloomed more vigorously than ever, nourished by the victory of standing my ground. The eastern section, once threatened by both fungal infection and development schemes, produced its best harvest in a decade. My family legacy remained intact, weathering modern threats just as it had survived countless challenges through the generations before me. The new neighbors who moved in months later introduced themselves politely, asking thoughtful questions about the orchard's history. When I offered them fresh apples from trees that had almost been lost, their appreciation seemed genuine. "We moved here because we love the beauty of agricultural land," they explained. "We would never want to change what makes this place special."